Today, we're going to hear from Kate Cohen. She's a Washington Post columnist and author of We of Little Faith, Why I Stopped Pretending to Believe, and Maybe You Should Too. And that's the book that's going to be downstairs. She's going to speak on the challenges of being an atheist in a country that presumes everyone is a believer, and the risks and rewards of choosing honestly in our own personal and public lives. We of Little Faith chronicles Kate's journey from Reformed Jew to outspoken atheist, her decision to raise her children as atheists, and her efforts to recognize and replace the beliefs religion can bring. It also argues that nonbelievers should be more vocal, both to enjoy more honest lives and to help save America. For this work, and for her columns, Inspecting America's Outsized Deference to Religion, the Freedom from Religion Foundation recently honored her with its Freethought Heroine Award. She's also the author of 2 previous books, The Nepi Madonna Diaries, Reading Jewish Survival Through My Italian Family, tells the story of a Jewish family who went into hiding to survive the Nazi invasion. And it explores Kate's own perspective as a post-Holocaust, non-believing Jew at the end of the 20th century. And then A Walk Down the Aisle, Notes on a Modern Wedding, examines through personal essays the functionally outdated but still hard to resist American ritual. She and her husband live on a farm in Albany, New York. So without further ado, Kate Cohen.
All right, is that good? Can all hear? Thank you, Claudette. Thank you, Barb. This place is amazing. I have to say that people complain about organized religion with good reason, but one thing that you have to say about it is that it is organized, and that's not easy. And to see a place like this that is providing community and time to think about interesting things and support for one another is just, I'm envious. We're visiting from Albany, New York, and so I write for the Post, but I live in upstate New York. If I lose my place or anything like that, we're going to just say altitude is the problem. So that's the agreement that we will all have. I'm speaking today about the challenges and the rewards of being an atheist. And at the risk of undermining the entire premise, I want to make it clear right up front that it is super, super easy to be an atheist. All you have to do is ask yourself, do I believe that there's a supernatural being in charge of the universe? If the answer is no, congratulations. That's it. You did it. So being an atheist is simple. It's so simple that even a child can do it. I was raised Reformed Jewish in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And although my family wasn't very, they weren't very serious people, they did do all the things, that were required of them as members of this Jewish community. They were kind of into it, I would say. We all went to synagogue. We lit Sabbath candles almost every Friday night, and that was the big family dinner for us every Friday night after we lit the candles and we said the prayers. My sisters and I were all bat mitzvah. And I don't know how much you know about the Jewish liturgy, but it's mostly just direct praise of a supreme being. I mean, whether it's a regular service or a holiday, you're pretty much just saying, blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, over and over, and then just swapping out the thing that you're praising him for. So candles, wine, bread, the Torah, escape from Egypt, just sort of fill in the blank. Lots and lots of that. And I did that too. And I really enjoyed it, honestly. I liked the togetherness, and I liked the singing, and I liked dressing up and being a good girl. But for some reason, I never really believed. I never really believed in that supreme being. I never believed that someone, let alone the villainous hero of the Old Testament, was listening to me pray when I prayed, or cared about who came to my 4th grade birthday party. I never saw God as anything other than a character in one of the most popular books that was ever written. That's how I saw him. And I don't really know why. I was a reader. My whole family were readers. Maybe that was it. It just, to me, fit in with all of the other characters that I enjoyed reading about and thinking about, and that had become part of popular culture. So, I didn't believe there was a supreme being, but I never told anyone that I never believed in the supreme being. I never dared to ask whether my parents really thought that there was a supreme being. I never talked to my sisters about it. I definitely didn't talk to my Sunday school teacher about it, or my rabbis. And I think there it's a little easier to understand where I was coming from. I would think that maybe some of you have had that same experience of just knowing it wasn't the right time to speak up, maybe. I was a good girl, as I said. I was a good student. I wanted to do and be what was expected of me. And what was expected was pretty clear. Please stand for the Shema, said the rabbi. So I stood. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, said the congregation. And that's what I said too. Outside of Temple Bethel, in the very Christian part of Virginia where I grew up, in this stubbornly religious, secular democracy where we all live, the instructions that I dutifully followed were less direct, but still quite clear. In God we trust, said our money. Under God, said the Pledge of Allegiance. God bless America, said every politician at the end of every speech. So I got it. I was good at context clues. Normal people believe in God. Americans believe in God. On our good days, maybe we acknowledge that people might believe in different religions. But we all believe in a higher power, right? I mean, that's just baseline, decent human being stuff. That is the lesson that I learned where I grew up. I think that is the lesson that our country teaches, and that is a point that I was trying to make recently in the column that I just had in the Post about the National Day of Prayer. No matter how vague a God you express, you're still leaving out people who don't believe in a higher power when you assert that the country is somehow exists under the authority of God. You can't make that vague enough to include me. Anyway, I wasn't thinking about that when I was a kid. I just wanted to be normal. So I kept quiet. Nobody out there had to know what was in here. That is the amazing thing about being a human being. You can keep those two things separate. To be honest, even in my head, it took me a while to be totally comfortable calling myself an atheist. Not because I had any doubts about whether a supernatural being controlled the universe, but because I didn't realize that that's all there was to it. And I shared some of the prejudices of the country that I grew up in. Polls show that Americans don't trust atheists. They don't want to vote for atheists. They don't want their children to marry atheists. Studies show that even atheists think serial killers are more likely to be atheists. So maybe I didn't think atheists killed for sport, but I did think they were annoying. It took me a while to think of myself as an atheist because first I had to stop thinking atheists were, well, stereotypical atheists. It took me a while to think of myself as an atheist, for instance, because I thought atheists were men. So picture an atheist right now, not me, that's cheating. Most people think Richard, Dan, Sam, Christopher, or the funny ones, Ricky and Bill. And in fact, more men than women do identify as atheists, maybe because women face more pressure to get along and make nice, or they think that being an atheist is a male thing to do, but you don't need to be male or even to possess any stereotypically male characteristics to be an atheist. You don't have to have a fatherly beard or a big brotherly sneer. You don't have to be aggressive or argumentative. Even if you are a man, you don't have to be ready and willing to lecture other people on how dumb religion is, or conversely, on how they're doing atheism wrong. It took me a while to think of myself as an atheist because I thought atheists hated religion and thought believers were stupid. In fact, atheists are not required to think religion is dumb or evil or responsible for all that is wrong with the world. I've written columns on why I don't think a Christian school should be given a public school charter, on how I don't understand why religious belief should be a get-out-of-laws-free card, on why people seem to think it's fine for religious organizations to discriminate, and on and on and on. And even I don't think religion is necessarily a bad thing. What's bad is the special deference we give it, the way we allow some people to use it to hurt other people. More on that later. As for belief in God, I never could understand it myself, but I know some people are comforted by it, and I would never try to take that comfort away. I'm just not interested in doing that. It took me a while to think of myself as an atheist because I thought atheists were strict, rational materialists who are unmoved by sunsets and sleeping babies. Turns out that's not true. Atheists can feel gratitude, just like believers. We can be guided by a strong sense of right and wrong. We can feel awe as we look out on the world. We can feel blessed to be alive in it. We can feel hope for the future, and we can even have faith in other people. Some people say they believe in God because they believe in wonder and in a kind of cosmic oneness that reveals itself to them in delightful coincidences or good fortune. But that's not believing in a supreme being. That is having big feelings about big things and giving those feelings the biggest word we have for it in this culture, which is God. But they're still atheists. It took me a while to think of myself as an atheist because I thought atheists had PhDs in philosophy or evolutionary biology, or preferably both. But I had to remind myself, it's so easy, even a child can do it. We don't have to know how the universe began, or why bad things happen to good people, or what the meaning of life is. We can reject belief in God as the answer to those questions without first coming up with other ones. That's perfectly fair. Now, if I were trying to convince you to believe something, sure, yes, the burden of proof would rest with me. If I were trying to convince you to pray to a supreme being you can't see, or make laws based on the wishes of a deity as conveyed in a book of uncertain origin, well then, I might have some explaining to do. If not, though, I'm allowed just to look around at what other people believe and say, that seems made up. That's fair. That's enough. If someone asks me how the Big Bang happened, I realize, I can just say, I don't know. That's fair. It's just not my responsibility to explain these things. I'm not required to say why I don't believe in the one creation story someone is telling out of all possible creation stories. I can just say, oh, a story. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my story for a minute. As I said, I was raised Reformed Jewish, and I acted Reformed Jewish all the way up through my Jewish wedding. This involves some outright lying and some garden variety not correcting people when they assumed certain things about me. And I was pretty comfortable with this state of polite pretense. And then I had kids. That was the turning point for me. Now, a lot of people kind of drift from the faiths of their childhoods in college and as young adults. A lot of young people don't return to their houses of worship until they have kids. And then they feel like to be good parents, they have to raise their children in a religion, probably the one that they were raised in, coincidentally. For me, it was the opposite. I had made these tiny humans, and it was abundantly clear to me that what was going in their brains was what I was putting in their brains. And that, to me, felt like an awesome responsibility. And instead of making me seek the faith of my upbringing, therefore, having children made me realize, finally, that I didn't want to pass along things I didn't believe. And I didn't believe God was anything other than a very popular human invention. And that is what I told them. And I'll read you that scene from the book. The chapter is called Thunderbolt. I can tell you the exact moment when I started to raise my children as atheists. It didn't feel momentous at the time, but it was a moment. Noah was 5, Jesse was 3, and we were sitting on the couch reading from D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths, a holdover from my childhood bookshelf. Those illustrations really freaked me out as a kid. It's one thing to read that Cronus ate his babies, but it's quite another to see it. So naturally, I had to share the experience with my boys. Sure, parenting is about helping your children navigate the world, but it's also about facing your demons while protected by total adoration and small, warm bodies in footy pajamas. Anyway, one of the boys asked what a myth was, and I told them it was a story about how the world works. People used to believe that these gods were in charge of what happened on Earth, and these stories helped explain things they didn't understand, like winter, or stars, or thunder. See, look, I flipped ahead to find a picture. Zeus has a thunderbolt. They don't believe them anymore? No, I said. That's why they call it myth. When people still believe it, they call it religion. Like the stories about God and Moses that we read at Passover, or the ones about Jesus and Christmas. They're just made up stories, like myths, but people still believe them. Here's how the D'Aulaire's book begins. In olden times, when men still worshipped ugly idols, there lived in the land of Greece a folk of shepherds and herdsmen who cherished light and beauty. They did not worship dark idols like their neighbors, but created instead their own beautiful, radiant gods. Every people creates its own gods, I said. The little warm bodies nodded, and we proceeded to Gaia and the Titans until I could feel Cronus lurking behind the next page. That was it, the big moment. I didn't set out to raise atheists per se. Before I had children, I certainly never planned to tell my children that religions were made up. I planned to read to them all the time and feed them food I made myself and make sure they wrote thank you notes. That was about it, except for one thing. I planned to tell them the truth. So, God is made up. That's what I told my kids. I didn't say, you may have noticed, some people think God is made up. No one knows for sure. I know what you're thinking, some of you, because that's another assumption I used to have. It's arrogant and anti-scientific to assert something that can't be proven. Well, actually, people do this all the time. People say to their children, without hemming and hawing, "No, honey, there are no monsters under the bed." Is that arrogant? Is that indoctrination? Why should saying God does not exist require a higher standard of proof or certainty? There's no way to prove there's no God, right? Since he's supposed to be invisible and intangible and work mysteriously, especially during school shootings, you can't disprove his existence. Some people feel intellectually dishonest, calling themselves atheists in the absence of proof there's no God. They are reluctant to say there's no God because it seems logically equivalent to saying there is a God, right? An argument from faith. But they are not reluctant to say there's no little green Martian guy, there's no swamp thing, there's no fairy godmother. To be an atheist, you don't have to be any more certain about the non-existence of God than you are about the non-existence of other imaginary creatures. I told my children God was made up. And that was when I really started to think of myself as an atheist. And as a parent with 3 little kids, I quickly and happily let go of another stereotype I had about atheists, which is that atheists have to atheist all the time. This is from my book. Your presumed atheistic responsibilities are extremely time-consuming. After you complain to the school board about the daily recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance and sue the town for its pre-meeting prayer policy, you have to picket a Christmas display, debate a Jesuit, carefully restamp all the "In God We Trust" mottos on your paper money with E pluribus unum, and try to convince your grandmother not to go to church. It's a full-time job. Atheist even sounds like a career. What's up with the kids? Well, Janie's a nutritionist now, and Abby just got certified as an atheist. She has her own practice now down in the city. It's not like that. It feels like it's like that, but it's not like that. Even I, the person standing up here making a speech about being an atheist, the person who wrote "We of Little Faith," why I stopped pretending to believe, am capable of going whole days without thinking about the fact that God is a human invention. And back then, raising 3 small children frequently slipped my mind, and definitely slipped my to-do list. When it came up, it was often as a practical matter. How to fill their lives with family and food and music and delight while not filling their brains with stuff I didn't believe. And down went another one of my assumptions, that atheists had to give up anything religious in their lives. For a book by an atheist Jew, We of Little Faith has a lot of Christmas in it. In part, that's because Christmas is a kind of shorthand for the culturally religious soup we all swim in, and the questions that that raises. How do we live in the world? How do we relate to our neighbors? You know, honestly, it's okay to put up a tree to celebrate the birthday of a deity you don't believe in. It's okay to sing the hymns at a funeral mass. It's okay to make matzo ball soup at Passover, even if you think the book of Exodus is both fictional and horrific. It's okay to love Renaissance paintings and gospel music. You don't have to take a vow of intellectual purity or cultural abstinence to be an atheist. So let's recap. You don't have to be a man. You don't have to hate religion or have contempt for believers. You don't have to give up joy or wonder or good manners. You don't have to have a PhD in evolutionary biology. You don't have to be more sure that there's no God than you are sure that there are no vampires. You don't have to do atheism like it's a job or a hobby. And you don't have to give up Christmas. So easy peasy. And in fact, I think in some ways it's easier than being religious. You don't have to square your moral instinct with the morality that has been set out for you in a holy book or by a religious authority. You don't have to figure out how to get into the afterlife. And you don't have to figure out how to explain why a just God lets horrible things happen. That's not part of your job. You know, so there are ways in which being an atheist is far easier than being religious. But I will admit there are some things to figure out. God and religion are human inventions, but they were invented for a reason, for several reasons. Not all of them to oppress women and sanctify the status quo. Part 2 of We of Little Faith asks, what are the things that people get from religion, from belief in God? Do we really need them? And if so, how can atheists get them too? I talk about the afterlife, which I think is why religion was invented, to cope with or explain away this horrible fact that we all become aware of at some point as human beings, which is that we're going to die. I talk about why I think holidays are important and what happens if you try to make up your own. I talk about whether there's any validity to the general assumption, which nonbelievers, as I said, sometimes share, that morality comes from religion. I will spoil that one. No, no. There's no validity to that assumption. People bring their morality to their holy books and not the other way around. I talk about why I'm drawn to churches and other places of worship, and where to find spaces that achieve that same combination of extra bathroom and higher purpose and pancakes once a month. I talk about prayer, public and private, which I was surprised to discover I think people do need. I talk about how to approach rites of passage when you don't believe in their religious underpinnings, and what to do about the in-laws. I talk about giving up the idea that God is in charge and how that frees us to accept the fact that humans are. And that if there's something wrong in the world, it's on us to change it. I think these chapters are a lot of fun. I get to quote everything from Hamlet to Bull Durham, from Epicurus to C.S. Lewis, Simone Biles, I think. Kevin Durant makes an appearance. I tell stories about my kids, and I talk about the things I did wrong and how I tried to correct them. And although I do come to conclusions, I'm also very compassionate about how hard it is to get through life, to raise kids, to get along with your family, to construct days that have meaning and purpose in them. Because finally, the challenge of being an atheist is just the challenge of living a meaningful life. Believers face that too. What they don't face is the pressure to stay silent during that process. The pressure to pretend they believe something that they don't. The biggest challenge of being an atheist in America isn't the being part. It's the saying part. After all, it's not just children who want to do what's expected and get along with authority figures and keep other people from thinking they're serial killers. Back when I was a child in synagogue, I looked around at everyone else and I assumed that they were actually worshiping during worship service instead of letting their minds wander like I was. But were they? How many of them didn't believe either, but were unwilling to say? Who's going to tell their family, friends, and neighbors they're the sort of people that people don't like? They're the last kind of people that anyone would vote for. So I decided I should. And that's the story I tell in We of Little Faith. And if you're an atheist, you should too. And that's the argument I make in We of Little Faith. Saying you're an atheist can be challenging. And I say this even from my extremely privileged position as a Reformed Jew among basically progressive people in a essentially democratic city in New York State. I didn't risk a lot when I came out as an atheist, and I still had a hard time doing it. It was still difficult for me. I am very careful in the book, and I would love to talk to you about this too, about not asking people to put themselves in dangerous positions. I'm not asking for that. I'm really asking for people who aren't risking anything, who aren't in a dangerous position, to take on that extra responsibility on behalf of people who can't, who are in communities or in family or in jobs where it would be too high a risk for them or their children to be vocal atheists. So when I find myself in a position of wanting to lie, wanting to pretend, wanting to keep the conversation going easily, and let the assumptions people are making stand. I give myself a little pep talk, and I'll give it to you now. I say to myself, remember that when you're honest with other people about your non-belief, you are doing them the honor of trusting them, of revealing a fact about yourself that they might judge you for. And you may be giving them the permission to speak freely about their own doubts or their own lack of belief. You may be giving them the comfort of learning that they are not alone. This happened so many times before I wrote the book, and it's happened so many times since that I have assumed as I take my little step out, off the cliff into self-revelation, that the person I'm talking to is going to be, at best, polite. And instead, what I find is they are ready and willing to share stories of their own, about their own doubt or their own religious upbringing. It's been an incredible education. But I still, every time, have to give myself the pep talk that person that I'm talking to could be me, decades earlier, a person who needs that encouragement. So fine, you could be giving someone that gift, but what do you get out of it? The first reward is personal. And when I first started writing We of Little Faith over a decade ago, I was making an argument for people to be honest with one another in their personal lives, for parents to be honest with their children, for children to be honest with their parents. For me, it was such a relief to get to talk to my kids about the big questions in life without having to pretend, without having to lie and imply that I thought there was or there might be a heaven, or there was or there might be a God. We could face the confusion and the dread and the joy of living together. Not only that, but the more I gathered the courage to tell people outside my family that I was an atheist, the more I found that people generally responded, as I said, with stories about their own doubts. I have been hiding the truth because I was afraid of cutting myself off from people, afraid of disconnecting. But telling the truth turned out to be an incredible path to connection. I believed that before I wrote my book, and my conviction has only gotten stronger in the months of speaking and travel that I've done since the book came out, in the conversations I've had and in the emails that I've received. And honestly, none of them have been. People assume that I get hate mail. I do not get hate mail. I get mail. I get gratitude. I get some people offering to pray for me, but great, that's fine. Also, I was raised Jewish, so I am used to that. That is par for the course. So the first reward is personal. The second reward is political. As the years passed, and as right-wing Christianity tightened its grip on our laws and on our courts, I became more and more convinced that our cultural habit of deferring to religion, granting legal carve-outs to religious institutions, listening to politicians talk about God and the Bible, shrugging at state-sponsored religious speech like the National Day of Prayer, was a habit we needed to break. I think our polite silence in the face of these quirky little holes in our wall of separation between church and state made it easier for Christian nationalism to flourish, to infiltrate our politics and threaten our freedom. More than threaten, in some cases, extinguish. Don't say gay laws, laws denying trans kids medical care, school library book bans. They are all motivated by a certain kind of right-wing Christianity and made possible by a society that, despite its secular foundations, increasingly grants special status to religion. We are now a country where religious belief is an excuse not to follow laws we have made to protect one another's health, safety, and civil rights. In 45 states and DC, parents can get religious exemptions from laws that require school children to be vaccinated. 7 states allow pharmacists to refuse to fill contraceptive prescriptions because of religious beliefs. Every business with a federal contract has to comply with federal non-discrimination rules unless it's a religious organization. Every state has mandatory reporting laws that require certain professionals, teachers, nurses, doctors, therapists, to tell the police if they learn of ongoing child abuse, even in a theoretically confidential setting. You know who's legally exempt from mandatory reporting laws in 26 states? I bet you do. Clergy. Some of this has been true all along. As a Jewish child growing up in Virginia, I had to opt out of the Bible instruction that was provided to my classmates in a public school. My children in their public school in New York State had to decide whether or not to say the under God part of the pledge. But it's gotten much worse. Because of the concerted efforts of a small minority of Christian nationalists and the gullibility or passivity of a large majority of Americans, our country's commitment to the first right enumerated in our Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, is faltering. The Supreme Court has decided that the citizens of Maine have to pay for parochial school, that a high school football coach should be free to lead a prayer on the 50-yard line, that a potential wedding website designer can reject potential same-sex clients. Last summer, Oklahoma approved the nation's first publicly funded Catholic school. This fall, Texas began allowing schools to employ clergy members in place of guidance counselors. And now other states are following suit. In February, an Alabama court found that frozen embryos were legally equivalent to living children in a legal decision that cited God 41 times. Our Speaker of the House has said that God put him there, that his position on every issue can be found in the Bible, that America is a Christian nation. Separation of church and state is a misnomer, and that Christians have a duty to bring government, quote, under the sway of the principles of righteousness. The Republican frontrunner for the presidency is selling Bibles and saying that under his watch, immigrants won't get into the country if they don't like our religion. It's scary out there. In 2023, there were 600 anti-trans bills considered across the nation. 87 became law. Women have already lost our full rights as citizens in this country. We could lose contraception and IVF and no-fault divorce and the right to travel to another state for health care. Measles is making a comeback, for God's sake, literally. Saying you're an atheist might be challenging in this country. It certainly is challenging in certain parts of this country. But I hope that the more we say we're atheists, especially those of us who don't fit the stereotype, conflict-avoiding parents, busy with kids, hazy on the details of how the universe began, happy to bake Christmas cookies, the more of us who are honest about being atheists, the more atheists we inspire to do the same. The more we say, matter-of-factly, God is a human invention, the more we push back against the idea that God should have anything to do with public money or public policy, that my neighbor's religious belief should have any effect on me. In addition to the sheer pleasure of living more truthful lives and giving others the courage to do the same, our honesty will, I hope, help Americans see the injustice and the absurdity of making laws or granting exemptions to laws based on the supposed wishes of a character in a book. I'll read a little from the very end of my book, the section called Save the Country, and then we'll talk. If you pretend to believe when you really don't, you allow people to behave as if belief in the supernatural is universal, as if it's not just the norm, but the only belief that is or should be normal, as if God's will has any place in a discussion of public policy, all of which elevates the value of religion and religious belief over public health, scientific inquiry, civil rights, and economic justice. Anti-atheist sentiment is not a matter of life or death in America, but transphobia is. Sexual violence against women is. Forced birth is. climate change is, pandemics are. If you need a reason to let people know that you don't believe moral authority derives from a supreme being, then I offer you no less than making America a safer, smarter, more just, and more compassionate country. And that, my friends, is a reward. Thank you. All right, questions?
So now we're going to take questions from the audience, and I'm going to engage one of my fellow board members to man the microphone and take it to people in the audience.
Yeah, I saw on TV one time, and I don't remember who it was quite a long time ago,
Yeah.
but a man was speaking about this topic. He considered himself an agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
He said he felt that it's the only intellectually honest way to look at either theism or atheism. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that that's technically true. That's technically true. But again, I feel like it is totally fine to do the kind of intellectual assessment that we are constantly doing, you know, as adults in this world, where we sort of survey what our fellow humans are doing and make judgments about them. And it seems perfectly fine to me to note the variety of, you know, different concepts of God, to note that they come into conflict, to note that it's something, the belief in God is something that humans seem to really want, you know, and the afterlife is something that people really seem to need. And to conclude from that it is a thing that we made up. I think that's fine. You know, and I sort of feel like I'm very happy to say that I am an atheist. And if I'm given any, you know, evidence to the contrary, I'm also happy to change my mind. But I feel like to say that I'm an agnostic implies that I think there's some evidence on both sides. I don't think there's evidence on both sides. I think all the evidence is on the side of that God is a human invention and not an actual entity. And so unless I'm proven, you know, unless it's proven otherwise, then I'm going to go with atheist. I mean, partly because I spent a lot of time in my life hedging, you know, and being there's a lot of room in being a Jew and being a Reformed Jew, especially, to sort of not exactly say what you believe. There's a lot of room in, I don't know, even in being an agnostic, in being a humanist, in being non-religious, in whatever it is. And I think it's important now in this political moment not to hedge. So if I come across proof that there's God, I will change my mind. But until then, I'm an atheist.
All right, are there any other questions in the audience?
Hi.
Hi.
I strongly feel that I'm an atheist, but my Reformed Jewish mother, she feels that I can be culturally Jewish
Yeah.
and an atheist.
Yes.
I don't understand that. Because it doesn't.
Well-
Because Judaism is, to me, I equate that with Hashem, religion.
Sure. Yeah.
So how do you be a cultural Jew and an atheist, or can you?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think you can. I mean, if you feel a connection to a tradition, even if you no longer feel that the tradition has any actual metaphysical, you know, truth to it, I think you can still feel that connection. I know people do. That's what I should say. Not that whether it's right or not, but a lot of people do. There's a lot of so-called secular Jews or Reform Jews who don't really believe. That was part of my struggle. You know, I noticed the things that were coming out of my mouth were not things that I believed. And as I said, as you know, that's like a lot of what you're just praising God the whole time. They leave it in Hebrew, which is clever because then it's a little more distant what you're saying from what you're understanding. But I really have a strong sense of like people just trying to get through life and maintain the connections that they feel are important to them. And so at the end of the book, I talk about not just being an atheist Jew, but the potential, like, could we maybe have a Catholic atheist or a Baptist atheist? Or like if people, I think people are sometimes really unwilling to give up the identities that they grew up with, that they take comfort from. And I wonder if there's a way to identify as an atheist and make it clear to people that you really don't believe that there's an actual, you know, supreme being, and still say, yeah, I was raised in the, you know, AME church, or I was, you know, this is still a part of my identity. I think Jews do that more than almost any other group. I got a letter from somebody the other day who's writing a autobiography called The Amish Atheist. And I thought, okay then, you know. So, but yeah, it really depends on your own tolerance for saying things you don't believe, I guess.
I just strongly feel that I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
And I have no problem saying it. I have no problem at all.
So she
And
wants you also to say that you're Jewish, or to
Yes,
ixnay
she
on the
does.
atheist part?
And
Okay.
I really want to just say I'm an atheist. Like, are you
Right.
allowed to just say I'm an atheist and not be Jewish too?
Of course.
Because she's like, she even said,
You
you're
want me to
probably
write
still
her a note?
Jewish."
I can.
She did. She goes, oh, she probably still identifies as Jewish. I was like, no, I think she's an atheist, Mom.
I mean, you know, this is one thing that's really interesting too. It sort of depends on the situation. When there's, I feel a lot of, I feel some pressure as a minority to sometimes identify as you know, which minority do I feel needs my support, you know, more? Or, you know, if I'm want to complain to my congressman about, you know, aid to Israel or something like that, it's more useful for me to say I'm a Jew than it is for me. It's not helpful for me to say I'm an atheist. They need to hear the other. So it also can be a situational thing.
So it seems to me that there's a separation for those of us who might consider ourselves atheists, to not have to separate from tradition, which is a little bit what you're saying. So I'm an atheist, and I have been
Yeah.
for many years, but at Christmas,
Right.
I don't have to celebrate. I don't feel obligated to. But sometimes I go to a Catholic church because I grew up Catholic, and I
Right.
like the ritual and the pomp and the circumstance and the candles, even that smelly incense, but it's still part of the tradition. But I don't believe a ounce of beans about it.
Right.
But coming together with the family or the food, or, you know, people light a candle, like, I can participate, and I'm okay with that. I think sometimes the people around me who might be Christian, like, question, how can you participate if you don't believe? But for me, I can participate. I can enjoy the tradition, Jewish, Catholic, whatever, without having that belief. Does that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. And I guess in my sort of mission to get more people to acknowledge non-belief, I'm saying, you know, keep whatever you want. You know, none of it's real. So all of it is, you know, all of it is a way to, we need ways to mark time. We need ways to express gratitude. We need all these things. A lot of times we got them from religion. There are other ways to get them. You guys are doing an amazing job right here getting some of those things. But if you need to still get them from a religious tradition, that's fine. I think I just ask that in the moments where you feel yourself letting something slide, letting an assumption slide, or being willing to pretend that you believe, that you say what you really think, even if it's just a few moments. I think we need a little bit more visibility, and I don't think that's going to require everyone to leave, everyone to, eschew Christmas at their aunt's house or something like that. But you could have a good conversation.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, in the Washington Post last week had an article, and I consider Washington Post to be credible, about a woman that had a son who at 2 years old was speaking about his friend or the fact that he was someone else, and provided details that a 2-year-old would have no way of knowing. I don't know how you feel about reincarnation, but this person, this little child,
Right.
he wouldn't know any of this only being 2. And then something like Beethoven wrote music while he was deaf. Another composer was born deaf and still wrote fantastic music. How does that happen? I guess nobody really knows, but I just wonder what your belief was.
I guess my belief is that the human brain is it is unfathomably complicated, and that so many of the things that people experience as divine or otherworldly, or even what they call spiritual, I just feel like has a material basis that we just don't understand yet.
Exactly.
And that is kind of the part of, to me, that is a source of wonder and delight. And, so that to me does not mean, again, I don't have to hate puppies and things like that and sunsets. To me, that does not believe that I go around, in a kind of angry, skeptical, disbelieving mode. It's more like, wow, there's something in us that makes us, imagine we see light when we are in, a near-death situation, or whatever it is. Like, what are these things? It's fascinating, but I don't necessarily think that it's not a physical, that there isn't a physical reason for that.
I see. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I'm hiding behind the pillar here,
Yeah.
but not intentionally. Hey, I really enjoyed your talk. When I read the review, I thought, I have to come. I have
Okay.
to come and see this, And you didn't disappoint. The thing that I really like what you talk about is being not dogmatic. And I truly believe that. I mean, I'm a non-believer, but one of my favorite things to do is look at churches. And I've always thought that a little bizarre, but I enjoy them. I like looking at the architecture, how
Absolutely.
they smell, the feel, and you've given me permission to do that.
Oh, yay, that's wonderful.
So I really, appreciate that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I would just say that I feel the same way. I'm a huge fan of churches, and there's a chapter on it. You can also do that, and of course, interrogate, the effect that that kind of architecture has on people, how convincing it can be, how architectural authority oddly converts to moral authority in people's heads, and there are interesting things to think. It doesn't mean that you have to be uncritical, but you can also just really appreciate the human, minds and the human effort that built them.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's always in my head,
Yeah.
thinking about these medieval churches. I mean, just the exploitation that happened to
Right.
build that.
Yes.
Hundreds of years of work. And
Yes.
what did they get out of it? Well, maybe they believed they were going to heaven. But two other real quick questions. I don't want to take up time. There's many here. This crowd is very diverse. I'm part of this community, but you are kind of speaking to the choir here.
Yeah.
I wonder, my first question is, where else do you give talks? I'd be interested who's open to
Yeah.
hear your story. And secondly, do you think young people are different? I mean, from what I'm reading, they tend to be more skeptical and less religious, but I don't know.
That statistically, Gen Z is absolutely, they're leaving religion. Whether that means they're sort of embracing the idea that they're atheists or whether it's more a checking out kind of a thing, it remains to be seen, I think. In terms of other places, yes, I've spoken to a lot of secular groups, and I love it. And I think that speaking to the choir is a really important thing to do, because those are the people who get stuff done. But I have spoken, I think libraries are kind of my favorite place to speak, really, in a way, and that is a totally mixed group. So maybe it's a little different, a little more like stories about my kids. But as I said, I think people I have found an openness and a willingness to talk. And it probably comes from what you were saying earlier, which is I do not judge anyone's belief. I only judge their desire to make me live my life according to their beliefs. That's the only thing. But just in terms of, you believe in a supreme being, that is fine. And I understand where the impulse comes from.
Can I share one other thing? I don't want to hog the time, but one of my favorite pieces of research was a piece done in the early 60s, and a sociologist addressed envelopes with postage affixed to it. Half were to the Archbishop of Chicago, and the other half was to the Satanic Temple. And he would leave them on the ground around town.
Yeah.
I mean, guess what happened? The Satanic Temple got very few of the letters. People wouldn't mail them, but they would mail them back to that the Archbishop would get it.
Oh,
I thought that's so telling of American culture.
Huh. Someone else is in charge of this, or am I? Okay. Joel, you're on it.
Thank you. Just a quick little preamble. I'm Hispanic. I don't see too many here, nor do I see many people of color. Being raised of color is, there's a lot of social pressure to conform to religion. My parents were raised in Taos, New Mexico, and have you ever heard of San Francisco de Assisi, the second oldest church in the country, Catholic church? Kind of know where I'm coming from. It's considered taboo to express yourself as a non-believer. All right, well, just getting that out of the way. I know there's been a lot of misunderstanding between atheism and agnostic. I think as atheists, even as atheists, we are technically agnostic. We don't know. But there are many, from what I have read, that will not take that leap, that will not take that step and admit that they are atheists, because saying you're an atheist comes with that baggage. Be either you're a Satan worshiper or you hate God or all those things. And I think there are many who would rather not deal with that,
Right.
because in terms of how society sees non-believers, being a non-believer or an agnostic, it's okay, it's tolerable. But if you're an atheist,
Yeah.
that means you have some type of ideological agenda. Now, I do a lot of debating and talking with theists, and of course try to keep it an open and honest conversation, which is difficult. So you have to be a little tolerant and kind of know where they're coming from. But one of the things that you raised has to do with the position of an atheist, because obviously we are always often misquoted as saying we believe there are no gods, where the mainstream atheist position would be, and I say mainstream because there are some that absolutely believe there is no God. But again, we will say, well, we're not saying that we don't believe there's a God, that there is no God. We just say we have no reason to believe. And it was interesting because you mentioned the fact that you brought up that situation of telling your children, well, there's no green monsters under the bed, and that's
right.
okay. But the thing is, we don't have a society where people believe in green monsters living under the bed.
Absolutely. That's where the pressure comes from, of course.
Yeah.
Like most adults don't believe that there are monsters under the bed. That's absolutely a big difference.
And I can say, I think as most, again, maybe just conjecture on my part, I could say inside, I don't believe there's a God, or that I believe there is no God. But you can say that in a colloquial sense, because having a math and science background, we know that there is no absolute truth.
Right.
Whether or not it's a belief in whether or not we're talking about the existence of a God, or even green monsters under your bed, or invisible fire-breathing dragons. Nothing can be proved with 100% certainty.
Sure.
And
And
I
that's
think-
why,
yeah.
believers are agnostics too, technically speaking, right? They do not know. They do not know. They
Yes.
just believe.
Oh, I would
So,
say
yeah.
yes.
I mean, I tend to say, I feel comfortable saying, and maybe you guys can use this too if you want to, that God is made up. God is a human invention. I feel like God is such an important concept and such a powerful concept that I would rather say this is something we made up, something that people seem to need, some people, and have needed, and but it's a human invention. I like that better than there is none. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Well,
yeah, but
yeah.
I think that the goal is to use, for me, to use atheists. You can say colloquially, of course it's not technically, I guess, colloquial atheists, and also thereby remove some of the baggage that you're talking about, for sure.
Well, that's
Yeah,
the task at
yeah.
hand, I think,
Which is
that we need to do.
only possible if some of us are more willing to say that that's what we are.
Yeah,
Can we-
and one last thing, there was sure, all right.
Well, we can talk after, too.
Sure.
I'm going to be downstairs.
I'll make it quick. Thank you for this. I am guilty of not speaking up as an atheist plenty of times in the past few years when I should have. And then 20 years ago, doing the opposite, being an ardent atheist and obnoxious about it, arrogant about it, when I very much didn't have. That said, I like now to say that I'm an atheist as much as I'm an a-leprechaunist.
Uh-huh.
That it's
That's
sort of
nice.
a language difference, and I think this may be key for a lot of us in discussing what might be culturally relevant versus
Right.
our belief in religion, etc. I would like to switch more to the idea of our human values and our human
Yeah.
compassion and characteristics, and using the non-believer moniker sometimes, my humanistic moniker others, and oftentimes agnostic and atheist, because true, agnostics are what we are, but I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
A doesn't mean against, it means without. That's one of many points I have about language. George Carlin said that we think in language, and that part's very important too. Also, the idea about reason and certainty, as scientifically oriented as a lot of us may be, the idea of being very certain and being therefore reason-based, we need to give grace to those that aren't that way so that we can find our commonalities in a poetic nature, I believe. But I really want to thank you for your books and your talk today.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for speaking today. I
Sure.
bought your book. I'm still working through it. I really appreciate you being here. I just want to know what your perspective on the role that atheists can take in blocking the Christian nationalist movement.
Right. So what role do atheists have to take in blocking the Christian nationalist movement? Thank you. So I first want to say that I think that there are so many people trying to fight Christian nationalism who are believers. There's an amazing group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. There are clergy who have joined in lawsuits in some states with really draconian abortion bans, to say, wait, but this impedes on my religious freedom. So there are people working from that angle. I mean, I think that atheists have a certain clarity and a certain view of the world that really admits no half measures in terms of having religion in our government at all. And so I feel like it's an important perspective, and I feel like there are a lot more atheists than we even know about, and we know about a lot. I used to go around saying, you know, there are only 4% actually identify, and then I realized 4% is a huge number. It's more than all the Jews and all the Muslims in America. So that's all. We're a lot of people, and I really think that the more vocal we are, the more we give permission to our elected representatives and to voters to push back against this idea that God should somehow be involved in a court decision. So I think there's a couple of ways to do it, but it is that clarity and that clarity is one of the reasons I really like to use that word, because there's just so many terms floating about. But let's get right to it. So that's what you have a question right here? Oh, you have a question. I'm sorry, the pillar.
That's okay. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Good.
You said at the beginning that we identify men as being atheists, and I think it's true, right? Men are the most open and out, if you will, atheists, and you talked about your experiences sort of making that decision to how to raise your children, and that a lot of women or parents feel that pull, like, oh, I need to teach them my religion that I grew up in, my traditions. Is there, you got the choir here, right? You're speaking to the choir, and you said, well, we'll go get the work done. Is there anything more that we can do besides just outing ourselves as atheists to make it safer and a safer place for women in particular and parents to proclaim that they're non-believers in this society?
So you mean safer in the general public, or safer in the atheist community, or in the general public? Yeah, I think making that leap to not just I'm an atheist, but teaching your kids, against the culture, teaching your kids, that God is a human invention is a huge, huge thing. But I think that for whatever sexist, patriarchal reasons it happened, women are actually, the reason that we think of men when we think of atheists is partly because women have had an outsized responsibility to be the keepers of the faith and sort of take the kids to Sunday school and get the holidays together. And you guys have probably heard of Seth Andrews, the thinking atheist. Well, he was telling me that when he was in Christian radio before he became a thinking atheist, they were told to just focus on women ages 18 to 35. Like that, those are the people raising the kids. Those are the people deciding whether or not they go to church on the weekend and stuff like that. So it's kind of paradoxical, but we do have an outsized power because of this stupid culture of ours. And we should try to use that, I think. Yeah.
All right.
We've got one here, very patient.
Is there not a group of atheist caucus people? Is there a group?
There is a Congressional Freethought Caucus.
Right.
There's 23 members.
Okay.
One of them, the person who started it, Jared Huffman, from California, calls himself a humanist. But none of the other ones do. You know what I mean? They are working for the separation of church and state.
Okay.
They're all working on issues. They are fighting Christian nationalism. They're doing the work, but they are not able to, call themselves atheists. I mean, Congressman Huffman was saying that a lot of them are in the closet.
Okay.
But I believe it. Jamie Raskin he is a co-chair of that, but he would not call himself a humanist or atheist. He would call himself. Oh yeah, and then that is a really important point. I think is like I would. We were talking about this earlier. I would rather have people whose values I share in there fighting for things that I care about than losing an election because they call themselves atheists. I just think that the more we call ourselves atheists, the more we give someone cover. If in the eventuality, in the future sometime when you might be able to actually, own that identity.